Okay. All this is an outgrowth of Bechukosai Telechu. If you're going to be toiling my Torah for the sake of retention and for the sake of mitzvos, which indicates this is the ultimate, and therefore you're investing every aspect of your being, your ability in this, it will generate, as it says, the earth will give forth, the rains will come in that time, your rains will come, the earth will give forth its bounty, and ultimately even the tree which is non-bearing will bear fruit. Because we explained that every tree initially bore fruit. It's only as a result of the chet of Eitz Hadas, which brought deficiency into existence. That's why certain trees were chosen not to bear fruit anymore. But ultimately, when the world be restored to its level of perfection, every tree will bear fruit. The threshing season will extend. There'll be so much wheat to process the thresh to the picking season, picking grapes. And the picking season will be so extended, it'll reach the time of planting, which normally they don't overlap. Again, v'achaltem lechem l'sova. This is similar to the Shemitah. Meaning in the sixth year, you will receive something. If you have faith, as we explained last week, you'll eat less, and that will sate you, will nourish you. V'achaltem lechem l'sova. V'shavtem levetach v'artzchem. And you will dwell in your land in security. V'chaltem lechem l'sova. Ochel kimov u'mizborach b'meov. Again, you eat a minuscule amount, and that minuscule amount is blessed in your innards. The less is the equivalent of the more, as it says by Shemitah. In the sixth year, Hashem will give you a yield that the less will be the equivalent of more. By the lechem aponim, as long as there was bracha b'lechem aponim, the less was more. You know, the Gemara tells us that one of the miracles of the lechem aponim was that when they ate it a week later, it was as fresh as it was when it was taken out of the oven. It even was hot. It was hot like it was taken out of the oven. Now the question is why? I mean, normally something deteriorates over time. It's exposed to the air, Things cool down, but it was just as fresh and hot, as tasty as it just came out of the oven. What's the understanding? We find that when the Mishkan was inaugurated and Aaron and his children were installed in the Mishkan, it says, Vayi b'yom hashmini, God's joy at that day was like when he created existence. As it says, Vayer vayivoker, as it says when he created the world, it says Vayihi bayom. It was the same joy. So we explained then, why was it so joyous when the Mishkan took on a permanent status? So we explained explicitly in the name of the Midrash, what was the intent of creation? Should God's presence be on the terrestrial level or on the celestial level? With the Malachim. It was meant to be, Hashem wanted to be together with mankind. Except Adam, because he ate of the Eitz Hadas, and he allowed that evil to intermingle and become part of his being and the whole existence, the world became putrefied, spiritually speaking. Therefore, the world didn't have the worthiness, or because what it represented, God didn't want to be associated with it. And God ascended to heaven. At Sinai, we became Adam. We took over that position that Adam was before the Chet. God says, I'm coming back. The original intent of creation will be reinstated. I will be on the celestial level, together with my people. What happened? We messed up with Chet Egel. Moshe Rabbeinu supplicated Hashem for Rachmim. We had Luchas Shniyos. We had the second set of tablets. Hashem says, now we're ready for real time. Make me a sanctuary, and I will dwell in that medium on the terrestrial level, and that will be the medium through which I will have a relationship with you. So that location, that small limited location, that's the fulfillment of the original intent. God exists on the terrestrial level. So what takes place in the Mishkan or in the Beis Hamikdash is the equivalent of what would have taken place pre-sin of Adam. The whole concept of cause and effect doesn't exist there. Normally something is fresh. Over time, it starts deteriorating because it's exposed. The exposure affects it. The Maral of Prague explains the whole concept of cause and effect is only a concept within the physical. That reality is only within the physical existence. In spiritual, whatever is, it remains at that level. There's no cause, there's no effect. And he explains, we find the Torah tells us that before Moshe Rabbeinu passed away, the Torah tells us he was 120 years old. And it says, Lo nos lecho lo kosa eno. His vibrancy was not diminished, and his eyesight was perfect. Health-wise, he was like a young person. And even in the grave, afilu bekever, Rashi says to Chazal, if you look at him, he looked like a living human being, even in the grave. Although his neshama departed, he did not deteriorate. So the Maral asks, why is the Torah giving us a health update on Moshe Rabbeinu? We're speaking of Moshe Rabbeinu's Adam B'Kol Adam. He's the most humble person who ever walked the face of the earth. What are we speaking about? His physical condition, his vibrancy, his strength, his eyesight. What's that all about? So the Maral explains, that's just to confirm that Moshe Rabbeinu, although he's a physical human being, but his essence and what he represented was the spiritual. He was unaffected. Life did not affect it. It's like, they say President of the United States, at one time, the 4 years, he would age 20 years. Because he would burn the candle from every side, from both ends. With all the pressures and responsibilities, he would age prematurely during those 4 years. That's because if you're a physical being, that's the reality of existence. This cause and effect. Moshe Rabbeinu was an unaffected person. He was unaffected. And that's what the Torah is testing to the fact that his physical condition did not deteriorate. He was imperfect. Life did not diminish him at all. That's what it is. If the Mishkan itself is the equivalent of Hashem Kodem Achet, before the sin, it was a spiritual, the physical existence was the equivalent of a spiritual existence. The bread doesn't deteriorate. And when you took it out hot, it remains hot. Everything is a constant over there. That's the understanding. The concept of finite or amount doesn't make a difference. They have ochel kimnis baruch meov. You can eat minuscule, there's no question. Miracle is that's natural. Natural is miracle. Miracle is only miracle because it's outside of the natural. What's natural today? What happened after Chet Odom Rishon, that's unnatural. That's not what's supposed to be. What's supposed to be Kodem Achet. That's natural. Therefore, it's Ochel Kim Misbarach Meov. When the Sati Shalom Boretz, I will place peace in the land. Ushchaftim ve'machrid. And when you sleep, it will be without trepidation, without trembling. V'shbati chayiro min haaretz. I will remove predator animals from your land. V'cherev lo sav ba'aretzchem. And a sword will not pass through your land. This is not even war. Meaning a foreign element who wants to pass through your land, when they carry weapons, they will not pass through your land. Because you never know. You have people who are not part of your representation, you're subject to danger. That concern or that worry doesn't exist. Let's see Rashi. Nosati shalom shema tomer harimachol harimishter. I mean, Hashem says, I'm giving you bounty beyond your imagination. Im ein shalom in klum. You hear this? If there's no peace, you have nothing. If you live in peace, even if you have less, you have more. If you have everything and don't have peace, you have nothing. Talmud Lomar, Achal gozos nosati shalom boretz. Bikansha shalom shokol keneged hakol. Peace is the equivalent of everything. No person has a marriage. You speak about shalom bayis. He's a top earner. He provides for his wife and whatever it is. But there's no shalom bayis. What is there? There's no marriage. There's no happiness. Whatever you have, you're not content. Because the core element, the word shalom comes from shalem. If the shleimus, shalom is shleimus. That's a whole. It's a whole functioning entity. If there's no shalom, it's not functioning as one entity. Separate parts. They can all be made of whatever it is. But if there's no peace, there's no meshing. It's nothing. Hashem creates peace, makes peace, and he creates everything. But Ernie, look what it says in the brackets. Quotes, finishes the pasuk. Ubori ra. Ose shalom bore esakol ubori ra. He created a setting for ra. That's the challenge. A person has a choice. We have a choice, choose between good and evil. And that's what life's all about. If there wouldn't be an alternative of evil, your choice of good is not a choice. I've turned down the ra for the sake of good. That's what it's about. Continuous challenges, questions. I'll give you an example. Person gives his son some money, capital to go into business. And his son's a smart boy. And if his father, every time he's about to fall in business, to take a financial loss, he doesn't allow him and doesn't even make aware that he could have lost money. He wants him to lose, to feel the feeling of losing, and the father is providing. Because ultimately, he'll appreciate what the downside is to work for the upside. And he'll be a better businessman because of this. Because he's been through it all. You've been through the thick and thin. The challenge, initially, it's not so easy. We say, kol hascholos koshos. All beginnings come with great difficulty. But once you understand the lay of the land, and it's not conceptual, but you're in it, then you rise to the challenge. You know, there's an expression, you rise to the challenge. Initially, it's not so easy to rise to the challenge because the greatest fear is the fear of the unknown. But once the unknown is no longer unknown and you have an understanding of what it is, then you're ready to what? To meet the challenge, even head on for that reason. There's a mitzvah called nichma veilim. God forbid a person loses certain relatives, loved ones. You console the mourner. The ultimate consolation, the person who comes to console the person who had the loss, if he is had a similar situation, that person could console that person because that person understands what that pain and what that loss is. I remember when I was sitting shiva with my wife, Allah Shalom, my children's friends came. They're already young married. And they're asking me about my wife. Talking about the kids, the children. Almost I felt the questions were childish. They were inappropriate questions. You know, they did it out of respect. They meant well. Didn't touch me whatsoever. Whatsoever. But a person who had a different level of representation, they went through it themselves, and they would say, and they would express it. But God forbid a person, Mr. Glick once said, you know, he lost 2 children in his life, 2 adult children. Somebody who's able to console him, if he's in that same, had similar experiences, that's a consolation. Rav Avram Osband should live and be well. He had a young daughter who was killed. She was 12 years old, just about 12, run over by a car. And Rav Shmuel Birnbaum, Zeichat Tzadik Levrocha D'Min Rosh Yeshiva, came to console him. Rav Shmuel Birnbaum lost 2 sons. One son he was about 23. He was killed in the Tanya on the beach because the soldiers patrolling the beach thought he was a terrorist, and he was shot. And he was killed many years ago. And he had an older son who had a family. He was tremendous Talmid Chacham, died of cancer. And he came to console Rav Avram Osband after he'd lost a 12-year-old daughter in this car accident. And he spoke, and when he spoke, sat with him, nobody else was in the room. He was sharing certain things with him that only the 2 of them were able to relate to, because they were through that pain. And they grieved similarly. And Rav Shmuel Birnbaum, nobody could equate whose grief is greater. Doesn't make a difference. But that was a consolation. And he told him, you can't imagine, because you're Rashiva, the way you're being tested. And Satan is going to snipe at you. And he's going to try to put questions in your mind to minimize your ability to go forward. This is the way Rav Shmuel Birnbaum spoke to Rav Osman during this period, short period when they were together. No, there's an expression in English: life's not a bowl of cherries. That's putting it mildly. But again, if a person at the end of the day, he deals with all the challenges that he should. He's on top of the mountain looking down, and he sees he has clarity. Everything starts making sense. Although you don't have all the answers, but it's okay. Because you have a relationship with Hashem that you know whatever he does is for the best, and you're able to go forward. There's so many positive things in your life which confirms it. When you do succeed in these challenges, although, as I always say, a question only needs an answer if the question's a question. If the question doesn't daunt you, it doesn't need an answer. It's okay. It tells us in Psochim that forgetting is a gift of life. Right now, what they're going through, we can't even relate to how bad it is. It's all consuming, totally destroys you. But some people say, I mean, even the parents, if they knew their child is no longer alive, they're able to make peace with it. They can put it behind them. But knowing every moment they're alive and what they're going through and what they're being subject to, that's beyond that capacity. They can't deal with that. But ultimately, time heals. You know, the Rashi we had in Bereshis, the reason why Yaakov could not be consoled when Yosef, he believed Yosef was mauled and killed by a wild beast. So Rashi says over there, because the only person who's nishtakech min alev when he passes away, if actually he died. But since Yosef was alive and Yaakov was not aware of that, that's the reason why he couldn't be consoled. That's Rashi cites Chazal. The gift of forgetting, in the ultimate sense, is only when the person is no longer in this existence. But if a person is still here and there's some level of attachment, it's like continuously the wound can't heal. That's what it is. When the person is in captivity and suffering everything else, the wound is very difficult to heal. Forgetting is not going to do it. Then you have to have that level of bitochon, of trust in Hashem, That dynamis. Without the dynamis and internalizing dynamis, it becomes all-consuming, that pain, all distracting. If you read, there's a book of the Kloisenberger Rebbe, it's just translated. ArtScroll put it out in English. Kloisenberger Rebbe in Europe had thousands and thousands of Hasidim. He was married, he had 11 children. And where he was in Europe, they only entered into war the last year of the war. His community was totally annihilated. His wife and 11 children were all killed. After the war, he was left with nothing. Handful of people. He was in Auschwitz. They tortured him, whatever it was, especially because he was a rabbi. When the Jews, the survivors, there were DP camps in Europe. He was the heartbeat of Judaism to every one of these people. He took under his wing the young girls, the young boys, and he became their adopted father and mother. And he gave them hope and strength to go on. Otherwise, they would have abandoned Judaism, totally abandoned. And he was dedicated to them, not to be believed. So a man who went through it himself, and Mr. Glick told me when he came to the United States and he spoke in Williamsburg, he says his beard was just growing back and he had jet black hair. And he spoke to a crowd of a few hundred people. They give them chizuk. He says, I'm just telling the words of Mr. Glick. And Mr. Glick as a young man was no slouch. He said his eyes were like burning coals and his mouth, the words that were coming out of his mouth was like a flamethrower. The words were so powerful. It energized the crowd. The people listening gave him a level of betochen and put things in perspective that a man who went through that, and despite that, he came across like a lion, not to be believed. I mean, I'm sharing with Mr. Glick's words, what he shared with me. This is when he just landed on these shores after the war.
Rebbe, I imagine you heard, I heard it in several sources that the Kloisenberg Rebbe, during the camps, you know what he kept on mumbling and saying to himself? He kept on saying during the hard labor, Tachat asher lo abadat Hashem lokecha b'simcha v'tov levav. Can one imagine?
Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky Zech Tzaddik Livrocha was born in Russia, and he spoke fluent Russian, even years later. When the Russian Jews came during the fall of communism, they came to the United States. So he met some of them at the airport because he was able to converse with them. And he was a rabbi, and he wore rabbinic garb, he was a Rosh Hashiva. And he meets an older man maybe 70 years old. And he asks him, do you remember your grandparents? He says, yes. And he spoke Yiddish to some degree, this man, because he was born before the Russian Revolution. And he says to him, do you know what Shema Yisrael is? He says, no. He says, do you know what Modani is? He says, no. Do you know any verses from the Torah? He says, I know one verse. He says, what verse do you know? And he quotes this verse. That the reason why the Tochach came upon us, because we did not serve God with joy, with good-heartedness. So Yaakov Kamenetsky asked him, what every Jew knows, even a child, you don't know. But this pasuk, which most people don't know, how do you know this pasuk? He says, I'll tell you a story. I was in Auschwitz, although he was a Russian Jew, and there was a rabbi there. And what they did was, the Germans, Yemach Shmam, they took a 50-pound sack of salt, they soaked it in water, and they put it on this rabbi's back. And they made him walk up and down a hill all day long to torture him. And every time he would start the ascent up the hill again, which took tremendous amount of energy, which he didn't have, he was malnourished, he would say that verse. He would give a groan, and he said, and he would go up the mountain, go up the hill, come down, and you repeat this multiple times every day. I heard it day in and day out. That's how I know that pasuk. This is what he shared with Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky. That's the pasuk he knows. He doesn't know Shema. So I told of the story at Malav Malka. I was speaking about something else in Bnei Brak, and there was a famous composer. I think his name is Mooney something, Moonish, composes songs in Israel.
Mona Rosenblum. I think he's
exactly.
a Homer. Yeah.
And he was there with his accordion. He as an accordion. And after I told him the story, he immediately put that pasuk to music. Immediately. And that pasuk already spread after that night. In Eretz Yisrael, they were singing it according to the music that he put to that pasuk. That's the story. At that Malav Malka, Reb Nissen Karelitz, Zechariah Levracha, was there. Iboru Chaim Moshe LaHirsch was there. And there were a number of other people there at the Malav Malka. It was for a certain purpose. It had to do with Kiruv in certain areas in Israel, whether it was people in Yeshiva, out of Yeshiva, whatever it was. But that was the purpose of that gathering, that Malav Malka.